how does Lacanian psychoanalysis differ from the more contemporary, let's say, pop forms of therapy that are more, ego psychology driven or CBT inspired? Or another way of asking that is, in contrast to, again, contemporary forms of therapy, um, what's the purpose of Lacanian psychoanalysis for an analysand?
Yeah, this is a question we could spend a few sessions going over. Yes, of course. I'd say like, yes, so much. There's so much to discuss here. But, let's try and think about it in terms that Lacan presents in the late 50s, where he speaks about um, his method in terms of its tactics, its strategy, and its politics. So I'll say that they differ in all of these. They differ in the way that the analyst, in the tactics, in the ways that the therapist or the analyst might engage with the patient or analysand, what one would say, how one would say it. And again, because we're taking small steps, so I'll just say some commonsensical things right now. No need to really get into the complexities at this point, unless you'll take me there, yeah, and I'll follow you. So in terms of interpretations, psychologists, they give a lot of advice. They tell you what they think is important for you, or what is the way to be happy. So in this sense, Lacanian psychoanalysts would never intervene for the sake of happiness or the good advice. So this is something you will not hear in a Lacanian analysis. These type of interpretations that I think are extremely dominant in these fields that you've mentioned have an effect, I think, of closing up one's associations rather than opening them up. So, for instance, saying to someone, and this is something that many people ask me to do, you are autistic. You are autistic, and this is why you behave this way. Oh, okay, that's it. Whereas an interpretation in a Lacanian analysis would never aim to put an end to your association. Yeah, it is always a question of what else? Maybe not this, but what otherwise? So that's in level of tactics and level of strategy. And this means how one positions themselves in the analysis, in the long run, not the tactical interventions that we're speaking about, but the strategy of the positioning of what many psychologists call the how they call it, the not the situation, the I forget, but there's a name for sort of how one should sit and how the room should look like, and there's sort of the setting, right? So one thinks about producing these as though they're sort of the long-term, long-run strategy where this will take us in let's say I think in these psi practices. The strategy is maybe, let's say, aiming at a cure, aiming at a relationship, aiming at, I don't know, particular goals. But in psychoanalysis, we have no particular goals other than handling the transference. And this means that for psychoanalysis, strategy is just the question of the positioning within the transference. This has to do with diagnosis and has to do with autism, as I write in my book, because when I say autism, I mean a different positioning within the transference, a different work within the transference. So in Lacanian analysis, we make great effort not to fall into a position within the transference that is one that you would find, let's say, outside of the practice, with a good friend, with a mentor, with a coach, with a teacher. but find a different positioning that cannot be reduced into what we usually call a relationship. So we aim against the relationship. And finally, in terms of politics, and this has to do with, let's say, the what will happen in the end. Yes, like Marxist politics, they have a certain end to them. So this is the question: what does psychoanalysis aim to do? And again, as I was saying, in the psych practices, there are particular aims. If it is solving a particular problem, or as we see in the, which is very common in the US, the idea of happiness. We don't see that in the politics of Lacanian psychoanalysis. We never promise a cure. We don't consider the question of the good in an analysis. It is more of a relationship to truth that is interesting for us. And in this sense, the analyst doesn't desire the good of the patient, the cure of the patient, or any particular thing for the patient. So the politics of psychoanalysis for Lacan hinge on this notion of a desire that belongs to the analyst that is completely amorphous. It is something like the unconscious because nothing can be put in its place that will satisfy it. So it is a desire, we might say, for pure difference, for something that is completely singular, something that is singular to be articulated, to be said, and then to have an effect. So I mean to be deployed in one's life. So this might be the goal of psychoanalysis for Lacanian analysts. And as you see, there is no one solution for everyone. It is a case-by-case perspective.